Hello, Alex.
Hey Ato, how are you?
I'm doing great because finally, for the first time, I can be in the same room with you
Yeah,
when doing this
this
podcast.
is the first time that I've met you actually. I didn't realize that you were so tall.
Right. And you're Australian.
Yeah,
What?
You didn't know?
No, I did not notice from you.
Okay, now I'm wearing my kangaroo shoes. Now you know.
Okay, good. Well, today we have a topic about traveling to China, inside China, from different countries to China, different modes of transportation, and everything that a person might want to know when coming to this country, specifically items which are not necessarily common in other countries or which you may not immediately think about. So, what do you have?
Well, maybe let's just talk about before people come to China, they need to plan the trip. And one thing that is, in fact, a little bit difficult about planning a trip in China is that Chinese people are very flexible with their planning. So when you're making a big trip, from Europe or from Australia or wherever you're starting from to go to China, you probably want to be telling your boss before you leave, these 2 weeks that I'm spending all this money, I'm going to be seeing these guys day one, day two, a few meetings a day. But in China, it's actually very difficult to nail people down like that. So what I tend to do is I try to have a little bit more of a flexible attitude when I am planning the trips. I try to make sure that I have enough time in each city that if the person is called away for a meeting, which happens quite a lot, especially if they work for a government office, they can get a call in the morning that they have to go for a meeting, that day. So I try to make sure that I have enough time in that city. And what I sometimes do is that if I have 2 people in one particular city that I definitely want to meet, then I'll also have 3 and 4, number 3 and number 4, who are not so important. But if one of my number 1 or number 2 choices bails out for whatever reason, then I haven't wasted my time, in that city. So that's something maybe that's a little bit different. I know in Finland, if you want to make an appointment, you make it 2 or 3, maybe even a month in advance, and you don't need to call again. You just come on the day at the time.
Show up.
And you show up there. And for me, that's very unusual because in China, even if I want to make an appointment to see you in 1 month's time, you would probably in China you say, that's too far ahead. I can't. When you come into my city next time, give me a call.
You call me the day before.
Just when you're in the city next time, they don't even have any time at all, and that's very difficult to explain. If you have a boss or a manager, and or if you're just spending your own money for your own business, justifying the trip, that you spend all this money to go to a place, and then maybe it cannot, maybe the meeting won't go through. So that's something that's a little bit different. The other thing is it depends on what type of places you are going to. So, for example, Beijing and Shanghai are really first world cities. Everything is very organized there. If you stay in a fairly nice hotel, you will know that you'll have English language service, and you might even have some Western TV. You'll have
even a VPN could be built in.
Yeah, well, for example, there's Holiday Inn. They always have a VPN, and that's
Marriott. I usually stay at Marriott.
Okay.
So they also.
And one thing we're talking about hotels is that some hotels Holiday Inn, if you want to pay for this podcast, you're welcome, but Holiday Inn has a very nice app and you can book on your phone, and when you're traveling in China, quite often things change very quickly. So, for example, we're now in Shanghai. Maybe you or I will get a call later today, say, you need to be in Chengdu tomorrow. Can you please, they won't say, please, you need to be in Chengdu tomorrow. I want to meet you if you have a customer there. And then you just have to go. So maybe you go straight to the airport, you book your tickets online, you book your hotel online, and Holiday Inn. I found that Holiday Inn Express was a very good valued hotel. They have, for me, what is quite important is that I have a Western breakfast, because during the day, you're going to be eating a lot of very fancy food with your customers. But if you have a nice Western breakfast in the morning and you have free internet, no hassles, good price, then and also the convenience of being able to book on an app on your phone, then that's really a big plus.
Maybe we can talk and explain what is a Chinese breakfast.
Well, a Chinese breakfast, it's normally they often have, they call it congee. It's like it's a watered down porridge. So watered down rice porridge. And by the way, watered down rice porridge is very good if you have a hangover. So even when those things happen after a big business dinner, sometimes having those rice congee is very good to soak up all the alcohol from the night before. But rice congee, and they will have, maybe you can put some preserved eggs in there. You know, those 1,000-year-old eggs.
Black eggs.
There's black eggs. Yeah. Or you can put, sometimes they put preserved fruit in there, normally salty things. And you can have different types of rice. So you have this, the white rice, or you may have, the black rice, or different types of grains. So that's very common. They'll also probably have some boiled eggs for you. Maybe they'll have some noodles. If it's a nicer place, then they will probably have a cook there making the noodles for you. Mm-hmm. But if you're away for a long time and you're having a lot of unusual foods, then just have a bowl of oatmeal. Right. Is sometimes really just what your stomach needs.
Out of curiosity, do you see, because I've been in Marriott, for example, they always have oatmeal. Yeah. How common is oatmeal in...
One thing I've noticed is that oatmeal is very, very common. Even in very local, small places, oatmeal is almost 99% there. It's not there 100%, but 99% of the time you can have oatmeal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's quite a big change to the past. I don't think so. I don't think 5 years ago people had that option. Okay. For their breakfast in a hotel. So I think that's something that's maybe changed. People's eating habits have changed in the last 5 years regarding oatmeal.
What I've noticed is that traditional Chinese breakfast, I think mostly is just like any other, like lunch or dinner. It's the same food only for breakfast, or any difference?
Not really. I think it's more simple, and they also have soy milk. Soy milk will be available. Mm-hmm. Maybe they have cow's milk there as well. Soy milk will definitely be there. And sometimes they have these breadsticks. It's a dough stick. I don't know if you've seen them. They're like maybe 20, 30 centimeters long, and they've been fried in oil in a wok. And the thing with those is that they're really oily. So once you eat one, you sort of feel it dripping out of your skin, half an hour later. So if you like that, then it's okay. But that's why for me, I like to have a Western breakfast. Somebody told me that no matter how at home you feel in a new country, the breakfast and the medicine are probably things that you can never really totally change over to. Mm-hmm. And I know from my own experience that I don't mind the Chinese breakfast once in a while, but if it's up to me, I'll have a Western breakfast, even though I've lived here, for more than 20 years. And the other thing is with medicine, I always prefer to have Western medicine over Chinese medicine. I have used it sometimes, and for those times, Chinese medicine was effective for me. But in general, I just like to take a pill and that's it. But mentioning that, actually, that is another thing that you should take. And I think quite often when people travel, they have a little bit of commonly used medicines. Mm-hmm. But you should be thinking that when you come to China, if there's anything, for example, I'm an asthmatic and I normally don't need my puffer, but I always have it with me because I know that one for insulin, for Ventolin, you can get Ventolin almost anywhere. Mm-hmm. But for any of the other medications for asthma, you need to go to a hospital. And if you're just traveling, you don't want to go through all the fuss of finding a hospital. And you have to be able to speak Chinese or have someone who speaks Chinese to take you. But then you'll be spending at least 4 or 5 hours to do that, because you have to queue up for your first consultation, and then you wait, and then you tell the doctor you want this, and then you have to queue up for the chemist, to get the medicine. So 4 hours could be wasted easily like that. So just so you don't have to worry about that. If you have anything like that type of medicine that you might not normally use, but if you need it, you really need it, just put that in your bag. And if you're in a small city, Western medicine is the brands that will most likely absolutely not be available. In Beijing or Shanghai, they probably will be available, but even then you'll need to get a prescription from the doctor, and they don't have the GPs, general practitioners in China. You have to go to the hospital, so it takes a long time. So that's sort of one thing that you should be thinking about. There's when you make your trip. Actually, when I was coming here on this trip, I was talking to a German engineer, and he's a diabetic, and he had a project here, and I asked him how long he planned to stay. He didn't know. He said, I have, I think he said he had 21 days of insulin, so he couldn't stay any more than 21 days. And the insulin that they sell in China is slightly different to the insulin that is available in the West. It's, I think in the West they have a more sort of advanced type of insulin. So for things like this, you really need to make sure that you have everything that you need, plus a few days extra, just in case you stay longer than you originally planned.
Yeah, and I think it'll be because people are traveling. Our topic is business travel, so you have meetings at the location, and it'd be very shame to miss the meetings because of a stomach flu or that. So I think there are some medications you can take even before the trip to prepare your gut.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know in Finland, but in Canada there is some type of medication that basically they say that if you have it, you drink it, then you won't have diarrhea for 6 months. It's some type of super bacteria.
I think it's like a probiotic.
I can't remember the name, but I looked at it when my Canadian friend was telling me about it. I couldn't find it for sale in Canada, in Finland, but maybe in
Finland there's different type of similar.
Yeah, because this brand was obviously a North American brand, so not maybe there's a local brand in Finland that's good. I actually don't do that. I do take there's like a stomach medicine. You can even if you're living in the West, the reason why I say you should have some type of preparation in China is that even if you're in Beijing or Shanghai, the level of hygiene in the kitchens is not at the same level as you're used to in Finland, and they also will probably use tap water. They might boil it. But I find, and this is another tip that I can give. When I lived in China, I always drank boiled tap water. I didn't have bottled water, and I also had a lot of problems with my stomach. And then from last year, when I've just been doing a lot of travel in China as opposed to living in China, I've only been having bottled water. So I still boil. So if you make tea, you get the bottled water and you boil that as opposed to boiling the tap water. And in theory, if you boil tap water, everything should be okay. But I noticed that since I did that, my stomach has been good. So
I guess boiling doesn't remove heavy metals from the water.
Yeah, but I don't think that would give you a stomach problem, upset your stomach. But that's one thing that I found, because I was thinking, I lived in China for so long and I must be used to the water, but still my stomach couldn't handle even boiled water. Yeah. So of course I brush my teeth with tap water. I'm not worried about that. But if you're making tea or coffee, especially if you're in the hotel and you have access to bottled water, always use that.
Yeah, I agree. I've never had any problems, I never had to throw up, but whenever my stomach goes bad, it's always the other end.
Yeah,
mine singing loudly.
Yeah, mine is always the down, not up either. But and this is another thing, that if you stay in a nice hotel, I think the breakfast quality, food quality will be better, and that's also a reason to stay in, for example, a Western style hotel. It's I really think that on the whole, of course, there are exceptions, but on the whole, if you stay in a chain, then the quality will be better than in a standalone local hotel.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in the countryside, of course, you don't have options like that. And then you just you find the best hotel that is available. And this is one thing that you should put in your bag if you are leaving Beijing and Shanghai, and that is instant coffee, because I like to have a coffee in the morning, and a lot of times in Chinese breakfast they won't have coffee, because in the countryside, or when I say the countryside, I mean outside of Beijing and Shanghai, people on average don't drink so much coffee. So that it's not really an option in the hotels, like in the rooms, and that's another reason for staying in a Western brand hotel, because they'll have coffee there in the room. So that's when you've had a hard day at work and you just want to come back and relax a bit, and then you can have some coffee. It's much better than having a little bit of some leaves to throw in your water. Anyway, I find that that's a little bit sort of like comfort food for me.
So how about traveling to China? What are your tips and recommendations coming into the country?
Well, when you make your planning, you should try to make it in the best way in terms of direction. And for example, Finnair, they fly to quite a few cities now in China. So I'm just using Finnair because they're also going to help pay for this podcast, maybe.
Not at the moment, so completely neutral opinion.
Yes. But since I'm living in Finland, for flying into China is very good. So, for example, because in the past I've been doing a lot of agricultural projects, and they're normally always outside of Beijing or Shanghai. But what I will do is, for example, if I have customers in the north of China, I might start in Beijing, and then internally I'll probably take the fast train and go to different cities, and then I will leave from, for example, Xi'an. Finnair is flying to Beijing and every day, in Xi'an a few times a week. So you time it that you fly in one place, and then you leave at the end of the trip. You're flying in another city, and that will really save you a lot of travel time, because travel is quite time wasting here in China. So if you can avoid, for example, if you start in Beijing and then you go all the way down to the south, and then you have to fly out of Beijing again, that will just waste at least 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Because for example, Finnair, they fly in the morning from China. They leave in the morning. So if you have a Monday flight, then you need to be in Beijing on Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
Because the planes in China almost always are late. If a plane is late by 1 hour, it's actually not too bad. And they're almost always late by, an hour is very, very common. But they can be, 4 or 5 hours late. And for example, a friend of mine was flying from Shandong the other day, and the plane was late, and they were waiting on the runway, and they were told it was traffic control that was not allowing them to take off. And then the stewardess said, we're getting ready to take off. Would everybody please pull down the window shades, and we're going to go. And because my friend was talking to me on the phone, I said, but normally your window shades have to be up so you can see outside. Yeah, I know, they're closing. So obviously, there was something outside that they didn't want you to see. But that sort of thing happens in China. The other thing with planes in China is that the airspace is controlled by the Air Force, and they give civilian aircraft a very small bandwidth of air to fly. And now that they have so many planes, there's basically, you see the traffic congestion on the streets, and it's also in the air. And the other thing is that planes normally cruise at about 10,000 meters, and they say if you cruise at 10,000 meters, it's smoother. You use less petrol because you have less drag, because there's less air up there. Mm-hmm. So they always have to fly a lot lower, and that's why they're taking, like if you think, this distance, if it was in Europe, this is how long it would take, you have to give yourself a little bit more time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they fly slower,
yeah,
or take longer.
And then when you're making your plans, I really recommend that you use the fast train network, because it's an excellent system, and you can buy the tickets online, and it's very easy. So the price is good. I normally go, especially if I'm traveling by myself, I will go first class. They also have a class that is higher than that called business class, but the business class is extremely expensive. It's much more than a plane ticket. So first class is roughly the same cost as a plane ticket. Maybe sometimes it's a bit more, sometimes it's a bit less. But you have a nice seat. You have a power socket, so you don't have to worry about your phone or your computer running out of juice. You have one of those foldable desks. So it's a good environment to work. So
do they have Wi-Fi?
No, you have to provide your own Wi-Fi.
Okay.
I've seen on some trains, that they say that they have Wi-Fi there, but I've never connected to it, and it's not a unified thing. So probably you'd have to register, because they register with this particular train company, because the trains are all run by provincial railway companies.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you're often in Shandong, maybe Shandong would have a Wi-Fi connection, and once you registered for that service, then whenever you got on a fast train or a train in Shandong, you could have access to that. But if you're traveling all over the place, so far they don't have a unified Wi-Fi system. Maybe in the future that will happen. And talking about Wi-Fi, I even saw a sign that China Eastern would start to put Wi-Fi on their flights.
Really?
Yeah, but there's also a little bit of a conflict in when you fly in China. They demand that your phone be turned off, not just in airplane mode.
Oh.
So I don't know how that's going to work if you wanted to use Wi-Fi. But anyway, I really recommend the fast train. The other thing with fast train is the train stations are generally almost in the center of the city. So if you want to go from Beijing to somewhere, you can take the subway very easily. It's a relatively short trip, and then once you're on the fast train, you're in the middle of wherever you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
You book it online. The only thing for foreigners is that you need to physically go and collect the ticket from the ticket office.
Yeah.
But you can do that at any train station, and they even have offices selling railway tickets around the cities. And so if you go to one of those places, you just show the booking number and your passport, and they will print the tickets for you. In the past, they used to charge 5 RMB, but 5 RMB for a ticket that was not for a train leaving from that station. So for example, you're in Beijing and you're going to get your return tickets. So Beijing, or you're going to Tianjin, for example. So you want to have 2 tickets, Beijing, Tianjin, Tianjin, Beijing. And in the past, if you went to get both tickets in Beijing, you would have to pay 5 RMB for the Tianjin to Beijing one. But recently, when I've been traveling in Zhejiang, they haven't done that. So maybe that has also been officially stopped, that charge. But yeah, just sort of because we're talking about
traveling.
Yeah, traveling. I'm just wondering if there's anything more to say about like a business trip.
So we have from different countries to China.
Yeah.
Major cities in China.
Yeah. And the other thing to remember is that when you're planning your trip, wherever you're flying from, remember that there are probably options that you can fly to cities that are relatively close where your meetings are. You don't have to just fly into Beijing or Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can reduce the amount of transfers that you make on your trip in, especially, then you'll find you'll have a lot more energy to do some work when you actually arrive in China.
True.
Maybe also we can talk about the airline companies in China.
Yeah.
There's many. It used to be one company. Air China was the first and only company. They still have Air China, and it is still a state-owned enterprise. But they now have a lot of different, a lot of local and a lot of regional airlines. So Air China is based in Beijing, and if you're flying out of Beijing, you might find that is your best bet, for either domestic or international. China Eastern is based in Shanghai, and they have many connections to Australia. You can go, I don't know if you can fly to Perth, probably you can directly from Shanghai, but you can definitely go to Brisbane, Melbourne, or Sydney. So that's really quite for Australia, that's basically all the major cities there. and in the south there's China Southern. And if you're talking about maybe the best airline, if you can, I always like China Southern. They have big planes, the big new planes, the price is very good, and for where I have wanted to fly from China overseas, they've always had very good connections. They fly, to all over Australia and now New Zealand. They also fly directly to Amsterdam, and they have other flights going as well. So these new flights are coming on all the time. You really need to check them out. There's also Hainan Air, which is based in Hainan, the island there in the south. And that is also a very nice airline, but it's smaller and not so many flights. But for example, they have a flight to Hungary. So if you were going to Central Europe from China, then that's a perfect flight connection. There's no need for you to go to London or even Amsterdam. You can just go directly to Hungary, and from there, if it's a surrounding country, then it's very much easier to travel that way.
Are there low-cost airlines?
Yes, there are. There's I can only think of two. There's Lucky, and there's Lucky Air, and there's OK Air.
Ironic name for an airline.
Yeah, there's OK, and then there is, for example, Tianjin. Tianjin has its own airline, and that is sort of seen as a little bit of a low-cost airline. But there are many. Sichuan Air, a lot of these ones are government controlled, but they're not so big. So basically, for international, you'd be looking at Air China, Southern and Eastern. And probably in terms of comfort, I think that Southern is the best. And even that their price is also very competitive. So sometimes, they've also been fighting with Qantas to try and get people to take China Southern starting in Australia, going to Guangzhou as a transit, and then heading to Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam other European cities. Mm-hmm. And so they've been very, their price is very, very good, and so I think they've taken a lot of business from Singapore and Singaporean Qantas and things like that. Mm-hmm. But for me, if you have a choice, Southern is probably maybe the best one.
Okay, nice. Okay, so arriving to, let's say, Shanghai is your end destination, and you arrive into Shanghai. How do I get around the city in the most efficient way?
Well, the one thing is that Shanghai has two airports.
Right.
And generally, international flights will land in Pudong. But Hongqiao also has some international flights, but I think those are mainly from Japan. So most likely you land in Pudong. Pudong has...
It's a nice airport.
It's a nice airport. It's very far from the city, but you have a few different options to get into the city. The cheapest, for example, I took the subway today, and it was only 5 RMB. If I'd taken a taxi, it probably would have been roughly 150 RMB. So it also took me a little bit more than an hour, but I think if I was in the car, I would probably also need about an hour because of traffic. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have much baggage, then subway or the maglev is a very good option. The only thing with the maglev is that it doesn't go completely into the city. So I would only take the maglev if the final stop was near your final destination. Mm-hmm. I've also heard that the taxi drivers at the maglev station aren't so honest. I don't know if that's...
I was cheated.
Okay, I've also heard other people say. So if you're going to catch a taxi, then I would say catch a taxi from the airport, because those guys are controlled very seriously. Yeah. And if you make a complaint, they can really track them down quite quickly. If you're going to take the subway, then only take the subway to your final destination. Or if you're just stopping on a normal street corner and then take a taxi, those taxis will be all right. But maglev, I wouldn't take, unless you want the experience, and then just be careful with the taxi. The other option you have is... it's not Uber. Uber has left China, but the company that bought some shares in Uber is called Didi, and Didi Taxis. And it's basically a transport platform on your phone that links you with taxi drivers or private drivers or semi-professional private drivers. Mm-hmm. And I use Didi a lot because in the little city where I was, there's not many taxis, and at the factory there were no taxis there. So it's very easy to do is you just turn the app on, you call the taxi, you put in where you are to be picked up, just like Uber, put where you're to be picked up, where you want to go. You can say, do you want to share the car? So sometimes, other people who are going in the same direction, the driver will pick them up as well. And if you do that, it's slightly cheaper. But it's a very good service. And
it works inside WeChat app.
Yeah, it's got a link there. But even if you don't use it through WeChat, you can still pay through WeChat.
Do they have their own app?
Yes.
I haven't found that.
Oh yeah, I'll show it to you later because
okay.
I think with the new app you have. I've also read that they are introducing an English version, because that was one real pity about Uber leaving China, in that Uber had an English interface,
right,
and you could link to your international phone and international credit cards. So now Didi have made the link to you can pay with an international credit card. So that's already a good first step. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is you can link it to your phone, your international phone. And they say that they're rolling out English language. They said Shanghai was already connected, but I just tried before, and they still don't have English interface. Mm-hmm. But once that's in English, and that's we're just talking about a matter of days, then that's really a thing that if anyone's spending some time in China, then they should try the Didi out. The only thing is that the Didi drivers will almost always call you to ask exactly where you are, and if you don't speak Chinese, then obviously that's a problem. And so I had one of my friends, and we set the Didi account up for him, and he used his Australian phone number. And the drivers still found us, but whenever we got into the car, they always complained, "Oh, you have a phone number, I couldn't call you." And I said, "Yeah, but one, you can't talk to him anyway because he doesn't, my friend doesn't speak Chinese, so there's no point to call him." The other thing is you found us anyway, but I think it's a habit that they have, that they call and say, "Where are you exactly?" and then you're there. So when you use Didi, one thing that you should do is straight away set up. You can only have two often used addresses: your home address and your office address. So if you're in one place for a week, then you put your office or wherever you go during the day, and your home, your hotel. And then if you move to another city, just set up the home for the hotel, and then that no matter what happens, you don't need money as long as your phone has data and you have batteries. Then you can call a car and get home. Yeah. So that's also a nice feeling, because you sometimes, for example, maybe you are going to meet someone and then you go for a dinner, and then at the end of the dinner, depending on the relationship with you, maybe they'll just say, "See you later, we're going," and then you're left somewhere. And even though I speak Chinese, and in the cities that I know, I'm quite familiar with the roads and things like that. I also don't like dealing with taxi drivers, because I find the taxi drivers quite often they will try to make a little bit of extra money from you. Mm-hmm. The taxis are old, they're smelly.
You talk about normal taxis, because I think Didi cars are much better.
Yes, and that's the reason why I always use the Didi private cars. Mm-hmm. The people, the drivers are normally extremely polite and they're very friendly. The cars are normally very new, and it's a very reliable and easy service, and you don't have to be looking for cash. Mm-hmm. And also, if you're on a business trip, you can probably claim all those trips. Mm-hmm. So what happens is you just get it on your phone, you can export it to, or you can send it to your trips as an email to yourself, and then you can claim that directly. Mm-hmm. And now that Didi is able to be linked to a foreign card, you can use your business card or whatever to pay for those trips. Yeah. So I think it's really for convenience and even for safety, because sometimes if you're in what you see often and this happens a lot for not just for foreigners, but for Chinese and foreigners, they'll go to an exhibition, and often the exhibition hall is very far from the city centre. So you always see taxis lining up there, and even they do it to the Chinese as well. They'll come to the taxi. Oh, it's empty. It's empty. Oh yeah, take me to blah blah place, and the guy will go 200, and you go, what? How do you know? Just use your meter. No, I'm not using the meter. 200, and you know that it should be 50 or something like that. Right. And then in the past, you had no option other than bargaining with him and pleading with him. But in the end, you know you're going to get ripped off anyway. Yeah. But now, and I don't know why those taxi drivers do it, but they still do it. And so once I was walking out of a construction market, and there were 3 taxis there, and in that area it was quite rare to see taxis, so to have 3 of them there, I was it's very convenient. So I walked out, and they sort of eyes, lit up when they saw me.
Like a Westerner.
Yeah, and then I noticed, and then I said, I want to go to this hotel, 20. And I said, but when I came here it was 10, 20. And then I was with a friend, and I was like saying, why are we even bothering? And I sort of said, why are we even bothering talking to this taxi driver? So I got my phone out, I called the Didi, and it came in 30 seconds, and it was 10 RMB in a new car with a friendly driver who doesn't smoke and stuff like that. And then I noticed just as I was getting the Didi that there was another Chinese girl who was coming from the market, and she didn't even talk to the taxi driver. She just got her phone and called Didi straight away. Yeah. So it's these taxi drivers, they're often not well educated and often not polite.
They have problems with their sight and their breathing,
hygiene,
their
hygiene,
spitting, and their throat is making sound. And
they're crazy drivers often. So in the past, they were the only option, and now Didi is definitely the way to do. So if you're going to spend some time in China, then you should definitely get yourself organised to use Didi, and you just have to download it. You can find it on the Apple Shop. Mm-hmm. And once it's done, you set your account up with your credit card and your phone, and you're on your way. Like I said, at the moment it's only in Chinese, which is a little bit of a bother. Yeah. But I think if you know the program well enough, you probably don't really have to read Chinese to be able to use it. Yeah. And the other thing is that you can make if you're claiming your expenses in China, you need a tax invoice in China. And you can apply for it on the program, and they will email it to you, an electronic one to your email.
That's nice.
So I, whenever I get out of a taxi or out of a Didi car, the first thing I do, you rate the driver, and then I say, send me an invoice. Mm-hmm. And because, it keeps the information from your last invoice, so the company name is there, your email is there, so you just go, yes, done. And then you get it, and it's in your inbox when you're back in the office after your business trip. You just print them all out, and you can make your claim. So it's very, very easy.
I can tell how I was cheated in a normal taxi here, with a meter, because they have a meter, and there's 3 numbers which are displayed. The first is the rate, depending on time. Is it rush hour, not rush hour? How much are they?
And waiting time.
Or maybe waiting time.
Yeah. So one is distance, and then if it stops after a certain amount of time, I don't know how long, 30 seconds or 1 minute, then it starts going on the waiting time.
Yeah. The second one is how far you have driven. So distance.
Yeah, and the other thing is that once you go over a certain range, the price goes up. The price per kilometer goes up.
And the third one is the actual sum up until that point, how much you have to pay.
Yeah.
So these particular taxi drivers, it was within Shanghai, center city, they have somehow tricked or adjusted the meters so that we were like driving at supposedly really, really fast. Like it was just like kilometer, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers. I'm like, how can it be that fast? Like at that time I did not know that it's for the distance.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that must be something weird, and because the fee was so high.
Did you pay him or?
We drove maybe 500 meters when I realized that this is like I should already be there. But this is how much it should cost to be at the location. It was like I just said like, okay, stop. I got out. I paid whatever it was because I didn't want to have any trouble.
Did you ask for an invoice?
No, not for that one.
Okay.
But usually I ask. Every time I ask,
you should always ask for a taxi invoice for 2 reasons. One is if you have forgotten something in your car, in his car, then there's a number on on the invoice to call to say that you've lost something, and all the information about the car is there, the number plate and everything like that. So they will be able to help you to find. So you should, as a habit, always ask for an invoice. Just say, you get out and then you realise, your phone is there. But the second thing is that if there is a problem, this is your proof that you use to complain. And there's a number there. And I was once in a taxi, and the guy was really crazy driver, and his suspension wasn't working properly. And I was really scared. It was from Pudong Airport coming into the city, and I was really quite nervous. But then I was thinking, I'm not going to complain, because his poor guy doesn't have money to fix his car, so whatever. But then when I was going to pay in Shanghai, and this is what I also want to say, if you're staying in Shanghai or Beijing or one of these big cities, basically a provincial capital, or Beijing, Shanghai, then you should get a transport card. And the transport card can be used for subways, buses, ferries if they have them, and in Shanghai it can also be used for the taxis. In Beijing, they don't use it. The system failed, so they don't use it for taxis anymore. Unless recently it's changed, but last time, within the last month, you haven't been able to use it for Beijing taxis. But in Shanghai, you can. So anyway, after coming from Pudong Airport and this crazy guy, I was thinking, no, I'm not going to complain. And then he said, whatever, 180. I said, I'll pay with the card, the transportation card. And he goes, no, pay cash. And I said, I don't have cash. What? Why don't you have cash? Because I have a card. Oh, 180 cash. I said, don't have cash. So this went around a few times, and then he realised that I didn't have cash. So then I was able to pay with the card. But if they refuse to let you pay with the card, that's also an offence. And then with his driving, I took the receipt, and there's a number on the receipt. And I called it while I was in the car and talking in Chinese, and so of course he can understand. I said, I'd like to complain about this car. He didn't want to take the transportation card, but that's a small thing. But I think his car is dangerous, and as soon as you say that, they'll start to pay attention. So I was with my boss, and he was getting his own suitcase out of the boot, and I was complaining. The taxi driver was like looking at me, not very happy. And I've heard in Shanghai that the complaint system is very effective. They investigate everything. And once I made the complaint, the person on the phone said, do you want to be notified of the result of our investigation? And I was going overseas, so I said, no, I don't. Please just, do the job yourself. And then that I could have been, if I give them my number, they would have called me and said, oh, we found this and this and this. So it's very good. And I've heard that if you have an X number of complaints, then you will lose your traffic, your taxi license.
Do you think they have to close the trunk when you put your stuff in there? Because I'm not sure if I told you this, but I was traveling with my colleague to airport from Shanghai.
Yeah.
And we had two big suitcases, and it was the traditional Volkswagen Santana. I think.
Did it have the gas cylinder in there?
No, it was empty trunk.
Oh, okay.
But we had such a big. It was two big bags, so he couldn't close his trunk.
Yeah.
And the road to the Pudong Airport is it's a highway.
Yeah, it's a highway. You're traveling along.
And it's at 120, 130 kilometers per hour. So he left the trunk open.
He didn't even octopus strap it down.
No, he didn't strap anything. He was just like, let's fix this bags so that they will not fall off.
Just and jam them in. Completely open?
Yes, completely open. And we drove like 120 kilometers per hour.
He was probably lucky that the police didn't see it, I think.
Yeah. But that happens, apparently.
If we're talking about horror stories, how much time do we have left, Arthur? We have some time?
We have time.
Right, well, maybe let's remind me to tell you the horror story with taking the long-distance bus. But let's first go through some other traffic options. For foreigners that are going to be in China for maybe a week, the options that we've spoken about, probably the best option is Didi taxi, then normal taxi. But the other thing is that if you can navigate yourself around on the subway system, and all big cities in China now have subway systems, if the subway system is convenient for you, then you should definitely, in terms of your hotel being close to the subway and where you want to go being close to the subway, then you should definitely take the subway, because all roads are very congested. The subway is also very easy. It's very cheap. It's also very cheap to use. One thing to be aware of is that in the mornings and in the afternoons in the big cities, especially Beijing and Shanghai, there are always very, very long queues to pass through security control. There's a security control through all subways in China, and they'll put your bag through an X-ray. There's no identification control, but they will check your bag. But if you can avoid the busy times, then really the subway systems, especially in Shanghai and Beijing, are just fantastic. You can really go almost anywhere in the city on a subway. And like I said, a trip that would take 150 RMB on a taxi, it's only 5 RMB in the subway. So in terms of saving money, it's also incredibly good. Also, the bus system is very good, but the thing with the bus system is that you can also get caught up in traffic jams, so that can be a problem. And the other thing is that if you realize that you're on the wrong bus, probably it's difficult to get back where you want to go. But if you get on the subway and you've realized you've got on the wrong line or the wrong direction, you just get off and go to the other side and then take the opposite side subway back. So probably buses if you're staying for a little bit longer. And then between cities, as I said, fast train or a normal train, then I would say fast train is the best, then plane, and if you can't do fast train or plane, then a normal train. But you'll have to remember that the normal train really can be a lot slower. So I think, for example, the normal train from Beijing to Shanghai is about 12 hours. But if you're on the fast train, like I said, it's about 4 hours. So, but it's a night train, that particular train between Beijing and Shanghai. So if you wanted to sleep on the train and then go to work or go to your meeting directly, that's also an option. In some places, they also have a ferry option, and this is particularly in Guangzhou. So if you are, or in Guangdong, if you are going, for example, to Hong Kong, you can take buses, their MTR, or a ferry service. And in fact, they have a ferry service from the Shenzhen airport directly to the Hong Kong airport. So if you're for example, you need to connect between those two airports, then maybe there's also a bus option. But I found, for me, when I did it a few years ago, that the ferry option was very good. So the connections between Hong Kong, Macau, and China are getting better and better, but and you should look at what options you have if you need to make those trips. Then, for example, if you live in China, we had an electric scooter, and we found it very, very convenient. So I had one, and my wife had one, and on the weekends we would almost never drive. I drove to work because work was outside of the city, so I needed to. But on the weekend, I never wanted to drive, because in the city that I lived in, Kunming, it was a relatively small city. Distances weren't big, but the roads were really congested, and parking was also very difficult.
And is it expensive also, the parking?
No, not in Kunming. Kunming is very cheap. Even in China in general is very cheap for parking.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think of because I haven't really been paying for parking recently, so I don't know. In Kunming, maybe it could be 5 RMB an hour, but that's in maybe it's more expensive now. But at that last year, that was considered to be a relatively high price in Kunming. But in other places, maybe you would be spending, if you, for example, in the Kunming airport, if you leave your car there for one full day, it's, I think, something like 80 RMB, and then the second day is 60 RMB. So compared to Helsinki car park costs, it's much cheaper.
Yeah.
Or most places. I was in Sydney last week, and we stayed in one place for 4 or 5 hours in the centre of the city, and it was $60. So
yeah.
It's in that way it's still relatively cheap, but the problem is that often there are there are no spaces to park.
Yeah.
So with the scooter, being able to park was not a problem. You can put shopping, you can put the kids on the scooter, so it's quite easy. So we found for small distances, like under 10 kilometers, then the scooter was by far the best option. And of course, if you're living here, then driving your own car is an option, but you need to get a Chinese driver's license. If you have the license from most countries, the most Western countries who have signed on to that international convention, whatever the convention's name, I can't remember now, then you are allowed to exchange your license to a Chinese license, and you need to do a theory test, but no practical driving test.
Okay.
I heard though that France has just signed a deal with China that French people who have residence permits in China are allowed to directly swap their licenses without a theory test. So okay. that's these things are always changing. In the past, for example, Chinese driver's licenses were able to be used to drive in Australia and to rent cars, but then after quite a few accidents, a lot of the rental companies said that they wanted people from China to also have an international driver's license, because they thought that would mean that they may have a better understanding of road rules and things like that. But when you're driving, you also have to be, basically in China, even if you're walking, you have to be really careful.
Yeah.
Look down, because I've known people that have fallen into those drain holes.
Uh-huh.
A friend of a friend fell onto, there was a valve, and it went up right between his legs, and that the muscle that holds your manliness, that was severed. So it was it went right.
Was this the horror story, or is
no? This is, I just remember as another one. So especially at night time when it's dark, always be looking down on the ground when you're walking or riding your bike or driving, because manholes are often not there, and you can just go straight down, and then that's it. So that's one thing to really think about.
I never thought about that.
Yeah. The other thing is, when you're out and about in China, you should not assume that a car will not be coming from any particular direction. So when you cross the road, in Australia, you should look to the left first and then the right. But in China, right and left, like in Europe. But basically in China, you should just look every way, because they could be coming at any direction. Even look up, because you never know what's coming from up above. So driving is quite stressful here. The roads are always very busy. People drive, I wouldn't say rudely, but they drive dangerously, in that they don't think about what they're doing could have an impact on other people. So, for example, indicating that you're changing lanes, that's not done. And some people don't indicate because when they change lanes, because when you indicate, sometimes people will speed up not to let you in. So, and others just don't indicate because they're lazy and they don't think it's important. So you basically have to be very, very aware of everything around you. And I know that there are some companies that don't allow their expats to drive in China because of one potential risk that you could have is that if you hit someone, then quite often you'll have a big issue with the family coming to your office or to your home and asking for huge amounts of compensation. And this can really, make a big impact on your business if you have, 25 uncles and aunties sitting in your office every day waiting to get this huge payment that they're expecting because you nudged their uncle.
So it sounds like if you hit somebody, you better just quickly drive off.
Well, that's against the law, of course, so I wouldn't say that.
Of course.
But what was happening in China, and you sort of saw it on the internet, that what people would do is if they knock someone over, Chinese people knocking a Chinese person over, that they would, and this has been captured on CCTV film, on camera sometimes, that they would reverse and go over to make sure the person was dead. Because compensation for a dead person is cheaper than compensation for someone who's injured.
No way.
Yeah, so it doesn't happen a lot, but there were reports. You do see reports occasionally on the internet about, and especially it's sometimes this happened by accident. So, for example, there was one alley, small alley, and when the driver was going through the alley, he hit someone, and he reversed forward, and then he left. So it's like in the West, if you have an accident, you cannot leave until all parties are happy, and if you leave without reporting it, then that's an offence, and then that's that possibility of jail time and the very big possibility of your license being taken away. So of course, you have to stay and deal with it. So that is one reason why some expats decide not to drive. The bad traffic, expensive cars, difficult to park are other reasons. And also now with Didi Taxi, you can basically get away without having a car. You go to the shops and you get your phone out and you call a car, and it's even more convenient maybe than having your own car. So that's one thing to the safety issue. You need to have it, obviously. Don't drive in China without a license, because if you're driving without a license, then basically you expose yourself to any insurance. I don't think the insurance would cover you if you don't have a license. I think that's also how it works in the West. So that sort of thing. A lot of companies will get higher third-party insurance. I think the standard is something like 200,000 RMB. So if you hit someone and that person is injured or dead, the insurance company will pay up to 200,000 for that person. But if they're in hospital and they're in there for a long time, probably 200,000 RMB is not enough. So a lot of companies will buy a higher rate of third-party insurance, and you can do it, I think, to $1 million or $1.5 million, and it's not so much more expensive. And if you really need to use it, then you'll be very happy that you spent that extra couple of thousand RMB per year. So that's also another good thing. I know a lot of people in China are riding motorbikes without licenses, foreigners, and basically you don't want to be doing anything illegal in China. So if you're driving or if you're riding, you want to make sure that your vehicle is registered and you have the proper license. So with scooters, electric scooters, you don't need to have a license, but the bike needs to be registered. So that's another thing. Once you start to have your own transportation, make sure that everything is legal, because everything is okay until something happens, and then if you have very bad luck and you kill someone or you have a serious accident, then of course the police will be checking everything, and you don't have a license, or your car is not registered, or you don't have insurance. Then of course it starts to get difficult. So in the past, probably still now, a lot of people, especially on motorbikes, they just rode with no documentation. But I would really not recommend that being a good thing to do.
We have been going over 1 hour now. We haven't talked about air quality yet.
Travel?
No, but air quality in big cities, in the countryside, in factory cities, industrial cities.
There are some areas that are much worse than others. For example, Beijing is quite well known to have bad air quality. Zhengzhou or Henan, the province in the center, that you have Beijing, and then the next province is Hebei, and then next one is Henan. And I was in Zhengzhou 3 or 4 months ago, and it was horrible. Really, really bad, persistent air pollution for 3 or 4 days. It was over, I think it came down to 300. That was the lowest that I saw it. But it was 400 sitting like that for, a couple of days. And I think, in Finland, maybe you have 20 or something like that. And so the higher you go, it becomes much, much worse. So if you're in a place that you have 400, you should definitely stay inside. And this is also another thing about selecting a better hotel. If you select a better hotel, They will have a central air conditioning. They might even have, may have some air filtering going on.
Yeah.
But if you stay in a real low-class, small Chinese hotel, then definitely they won't have any of that.
Yeah.
And I was in that place in Henan. It was starting to get a little bit cold, and they still hadn't had the heating on because official heating starts in the middle of November. So in the first 2 weeks of November, it's already cold, but they don't have heating on. So I was quite cold in the room, and I saw it had an air conditioner that blew hot and cold. So I put it on hot, but then I was like, what? The smell? And the thing is that, those air conditioners, the very simple ones, they just bring the air from outside directly in.
Okay.
And then I was like, oh, you can really smell the air. Yeah, so then I turned it off. I said, it's better to be a little bit cold.
Right.
Than
First my sweater.
Yeah, then have that the air being blown in. But I think if you have lung issues, then you should always be paying attention to the AQI, the air quality index, because if it goes above 100, you should really not be outside so much. I never wear a mask, even though I have asthma. Maybe I should, but I never do.
Maybe that's why you have asthma in the first place.
Maybe. But it's hard to say because I also have it in Finland, and Finland is relatively clean, a very clean place. So I think that AQI is something to keep an eye on. The other thing to know about AQI is that the Chinese government publishes their own AQI, and the American embassies and consulates also publish their results from their own testing stations in the cities that they have missions. So I always look at the American embassy AQI indexes because for the cities that they have them, so that's Chengdu, Beijing, Shenyang, Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou, because those are more or less accurate.
Yeah.
But if you're outside of those areas, you have to use you can only use Chinese government figures, and for those figures, you really don't know. I saw there was something on the internet the other day that they had a very, very bad sandstorm in Beijing last week, and the air pollution went up to 900. So it's really bad.
900.
Yeah,
I never knew. No one can go that high.
It's gone in one place in Hebei. It went to 1,000 once. So that's basically you can't leave. You can't go outside. You have to have all the windows shut, air purifiers on. But it went to 900, and then someone took a picture of one of the testing stations, and they had a purified air truck blowing onto the testing station. So, I suppose the picture could be fake, but it doesn't surprise me. I also remember once when they were preparing for the Olympics, they were painting the grass green.
Yeah.
And it was on the radio, and they said, this is a lie, this is not true, we're not painting the grass green. What people probably saw was that they were just spraying pesticides or something on the grass. But I was driving in Beijing, and I went past the guy who was he was spraying green paint on the grass. So it's definitely done.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do it anymore, but they definitely did it at that time.
I have two apps installed on my phone which tell this information. One is called Air Matters.
Yeah.
Not Mattress. And then it's China AQI.
Yeah, but have a look at the one from the embassy. This one from the American embassy.
Well, this one has the embassy figures in it.
Okay, well that's more trustworthy.
You can select the. Well, actually, now the normal is 147 for Shanghai, and the U.S. consulate is lower.
Okay, that's unusual. Okay.
Yeah, that is unusual.
That's unusual, but it also because the testing points are different, so it's hard to say.
And Beijing is 55, which is.
You know what that means. That means it's very windy.
Yeah, probably.
Beijing only gets like that if it's extremely windy. But for me, someone with asthma, that for traveling through China, AQI hasn't been an issue. If I've had, for example, a Saturday or a Sunday where I haven't had any set appointments, then if the air pollution is bad, I will stay in the hotel. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that has affected. Unfortunately, if you have a meeting, you just have to go to the meeting. So the only thing is that if you find it really affects you, then probably getting a mask would be a good idea. And the other thing to remember with those masks is once the filter becomes wet, the filter stops functioning.
Okay.
So you need to, when you buy a mask, they will have instructions on it, but you need to be aware that you can only use the filter for a certain amount of time.
Yeah. And getting back to taxi drivers, oftentimes, even in the worst possible air quality, they keep their windows open.
Yeah, yeah, it's strange, isn't it? But also you see this especially in the south, where the houses are not heated. They will always like to have their windows open, even if it's freezing, because they think that having this fresh, freezing air blowing into the house is healthy. And that can be really hard. We once went to our friends in Chengdu and they had the windows open and even the garage open. They had a standalone house and they had everything open and we were just sitting there freezing, and Finnish people, and my wife is Finnish, the Finnish people don't handle cold houses very well.
No.
Outside,
we don't have those.
Yeah, in Finland there's no cold houses. So, and that's why people often say, Chinese people say, how come, you don't like the cold so much? I thought Finland, 2 degrees is not cold for you. Yeah, 2 degrees outside is not cold because in Finland you dress correctly for the weather.
Right.
But in the houses it's always warm. It's always, 18, 19, 20, whatever you want to set it at. Mm-hmm. And that's something that people in the south of China don't know. But one thing I noticed about that is that people are now installing central heating in their villas in the south of China. That's new. And that's, of course, nice if you want to live there. But of course, it's also going to escalate the amount of pollution that's in the air.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you this story. It's about a Russian friend. It's a true story, and he was catching the long distance bus. He was studying in Changsha, in the capital of Hunan province, a very, very hot place, and he was going somewhere on the bus. So it was a long distance bus, and in those days there were no toilets or anything, and there weren't even many rest areas. So what happens, they would stop at a place that have maybe a farmer's toilet there, or sometimes in Yunnan they'll just say, guys to the right, girls to the left, and then you go on those sides of the roads and you do your stuff and come back. But anyway, for him, at this stop, there was a very traditional farmer's house, and a lot of the farmer's house, they keep pigs on the ground floor, but they also sometimes they have... this particular one is that they had you'd go upstairs and there was sort of bamboo that you'd walk on and squat on to do your business, mm-hmm. and then there was a pond underneath, and they probably had fish there. But it was a public bus stop, so it was just full of what comes out. Mm-hmm. And so he went in there, and it's very hot. He went in there, and the bamboo broke. And he fell through up to his neck with liquid shit. And then he had to get back on the bus, and he said it was like 8 hours. And the bus had no air conditioning, just all open windows and 38, 39 degrees heat. And he was covered with that stuff. And he was there for 8 hours. He said the smell you cannot imagine. So. Traveling in China is now much, 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 much better than that.
But I'm sure he had much more room around him.
I'm sure no one wanted to sit near him.
It's so comfortable. I can stretch my legs.
Yeah, so even you could stretch your legs probably. So basically, travel in China has really gotten a lot better. Planes are being delayed more, though, I think, because there's more pressure on the space in the sky. So the roads still are very blocked. So if you can, take the subway, take the fast train. I think that those are, if you can, those are easily the best ways of getting around the country. For taxis, take a Didi taxi if you can. Nicer car, nicer driver. Everything is paid with your card or your WeChat account, so you don't have to have cash, and you have a record of all your journeys. You can still get your invoice, over the app, so it's very good. So I think sort of disruption things like Uber have really made a big difference in China. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the websites you need for booking your train, you can book it directly on the railway website or on their app, but that is only in Chinese, and you must use a Chinese card to pay. So Ctrip, Elong, those are two ones that are more. Ctrip is now the biggest, but Elong is also there. There are also other ones, and those ones you can book your flights, train, and hotels there. So the basically now you can get around with organising everything that you need in English on your phone and being paid with your foreign card. Ctrip allows you to link it to an overseas card. And I think the aim for everyone is to try, when you're traveling in China, to be able to be independent, to move around and not rely on Chinese colleagues or your supplier or your customer to have to organize things. Because if you seem really helpless, then if they want to make a deal with you, then probably they'll also try to get a good price that doesn't work in your favor. But if you sort of show yourself to be independent and able to manage your way around China, I think it does give you some respect that's important when you're starting to do business with people.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think we should find soda water.
Yeah.
So I don't know if do you have any questions, Arthur? Or
no, I don't think so. I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah.
And do maybe follow up later on if there's lots of questions from the audience or.
Yeah, we've seen that there are more subscribers, so that's very good news for us. So,
especially since now this podcast works also in China, which slightly broadens the audience.
Exactly.
Okay. So as always, if there's any questions, just reply to website or Twitter or email. We're available.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. That's it.
See you.